down there. So it's a pleasure to be here, first and foremost. I mean, what a wonderful location it is in Barbados. It's got to be right up there with one of the most beautiful parts of the world, I think. I'm here really in my capacity to talk about trade, so it's been really interesting listening to the conversation yesterday, and it certainly grounds the mind in terms of where does trade fit in the broader context of digital economies, particularly in a complex environment like the Caribbean. But just for the sake of my session here today, I'm just going to focus in on that trade piece. Great presentation from Cindy. I'm going to pick up on the standards piece as well and why that's important. And yes, there are lots of reasons why we should adopt standards to drive innovation, and I'll hopefully touch on some of that. So we have an outrageous goal at the ICC to digitalize 60 to 80% of world trade by 2026. It's outrageously ambitious, which is one of the reasons why I like it, but it really focuses the mind on the opportunity that lies right in front of us. Just to let me explain a little bit about ICC and who we are, because I think that's important context. We're a large organization. We're the largest world business organization, founded in 1919. We represent 45 million companies in 100 different countries. So we're large, and we have a terrific amount of support from companies of all sizes and sectors. We're not speaking on behalf of the big companies. We're not speaking on behalf of the big economies. We're speaking on behalf of everybody. And our primary goal here is to make trade work for everyone. It's more inclusive, more accessible, lower cost, more access to finance, and so on. The key initiative in the context of digitalization of world trade is the ICC Digital Standards Initiative. That was set up in 2020, partly on the back of the ICC Digital Trade Roadmap, which I'm going to show you in a minute, which we published in 2017. And its goal is really to act as a convening point to bring all the standards bodies together, to bring all the multilateral banks together, to bring the international institutions and governments together with industry to start to harmonize and accelerate the digitalization of the world trading system. And it was set up by 5 founding organizations, all listed up on the screen there. There are 2 really important boards that sit within the Digital Standards Initiative, and this is just to give you a flavor of who's involved. One is called the Industry Advisory Board. That body is responsible for now harmonizing all of the global standards that sit across the trade ecosystem to agree the framework for which standards you apply in which parts of the system. And I'll come to that in a little bit later in terms of the standards toolkit. The second, which is what I'm a co-chair of, is the Legal Reform Advisory Board. And that's the bit I'm going to really focus on you, because you are primarily a government audience with a clear ask of what we're asking all governments to do. And as you can see, a great plethora of major institutions, including the Commonwealth. Vashti is a member of that board, where we are leading the campaign right across the world now to remove legal barriers to the digitalization of commercial trade documents. That's our first priority, to make the system go paperless. So why digitalize trade? Well, for me, there are sort of 4. There's lots of reasons to digitalize trade, is a short story, but for me, there are 4 basic cases for this. One is cost. The cost of trade at the moment is excessively high for no other reason that we are absolutely swamped in paper. 4 billion documents are floating around the trade system at any given time. If you speak to any of the big banks, they're dealing with millions of documents, even within that single bank, never mind the corporates and everybody else. It's a ridiculously old, antiquated system. And it's old and antiquated for one simple reason, that we're operating on laws that go back to the 1800s and were designed not for digital. So all we're asking really now is to upgrade those laws and allow those documents to be digitalized so that we can be faster, cheaper, and simpler, and just get rid of all of that paper. You'll see the numbers in a minute, and I'll explain why those numbers are so big, but it's directly related to that first priority. Second is the trade finance gap. We've had a persistent trade finance gap of $1.7 trillion ever since 2008, when the financial crisis happened. The regulators came in, clamped down on the market, and what they did is they bundled the regulations for trade finance in with all the other regulations for higher risk finance. Trade finance is a 0 to low risk financial activity. It's been proven so for over 10 years. By ICC data, there is no evidence whatsoever why we should be treating it as high-risk finance. And the cost is that we can't get working capital to SMEs because the banks and fintechs are all wrapped up in all this bureaucracy from paper-heavy trade. Thirdly, in terms of fraud, tax, a more secure system. How do we tackle fraud? Well, surprise, surprise, that's about implementing simple tools like legal entity identifiers, digital identities on a standardized basis. It's about implementing smarter technology solutions. There is no reason why we should be dealing with the size of fraud in the trade market as we are. There was a huge case in the UK just 2 weeks ago of 500 million pounds, 20 different requests to banks. The only reason that happened was because those banks couldn't see where the funding requests were to the other banks. So they all financed the activity. It was clearly fraudulent. It could have been completely prevented. It was totally unnecessary. If we digitalize that ecosystem around the financial services, we can actually eliminate a lot of that and shut the fraudsters out of the trade system altogether. And then fourthly, which is important in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, is we can't deliver net zero, nature positive global value chains. We've all committed to do that through the Paris Accord and the Montreal Biodiversity Agreement. We can't deliver that objective until we digitalize the trade system, because the key information we need in order to know what is sustainable and what is not, what the goods are, who owns the goods, who's paying for the goods, where those goods are from, are all buried on paper documents all over the world in 1,000 different systems. We've got to get that system, that data into a digitalized ecosystem so we can aggregate the data, we can integrate it with the wider sustainability measures, impact measures and data systems. Then we can say, okay, what's sustainable, what's not, how do we mitigate the impacts? Very, very important in the long term. So the digital trade roadmap, I'm sorry if the text is a little bit small here. You don't need to, these slides will be readily available for everybody, by the way. So this is just to set out what's the problem we're trying to solve here. Well, down the left-hand side, that's trade today. Anyone who's in trade will know exactly what I'm talking about here. For lots of policymakers, are completely unaware that trade operates in this kind of way. It's totally antiquated, as I've already said. There are sometimes up to 27 to 30 to 40 trade documents in any transaction. Transactions can take on average up to 2 to 3 months to transact because everybody's bouncing pieces of paper left, right, and center. It's incredibly slow. And ultimately, only 1% of bills of lading are in digital form. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second big problem, so the first problem, sorry, is legal reform. I'll come to that. The second big problem is the standards piece, digital islands. Now, in our consumer lives, we all use mobile phones, everything connects to everything, and we can exist in a digital economy for the most part. In the trade world, you can't do that. No systems don't talk to each other because there's no standardized data formats. There's no way of moving commercial trade information in any simplified form. The only solution to that is to get a standardized, harmonized system into place. And then thirdly, the trade finance gap, which I've already talked about. Now, the future is the complete reverse, and everything I'm describing in the middle column is already happening. It's just not happening at scale, and that's where we need your help in terms of legal reform. It's completely interoperable. Systems and processes are talking to each other across the private sector and public sector. There's no paper involved in any of this. Transactions are happening in minutes, not months. Transaction costs, trade transaction costs will be reduced 80%. Half the trade finance gap evaporates, and so on and so forth. So what's the economic prize here? Well, there's a terrific study done by Vashti's team at the Commonwealth just last year. The economic prize is 1.2 trillion. 2 trillion, if you combine that with customs digitalization, it's absolutely huge. It's twice the trade target for the Commonwealth by 2030, on top of the other benefits I've already mentioned, around 80% cut in trade transaction costs, 50% cut in the trade finance gap, 35% uptake in SME efficiency, and then cross-border compliance time processing, that sort of cross-border complexity piece, dropping from 25 to 1 day, 25 days to 1 day. It's huge. And then those numbers all go up when you start talking in the G7, it's 9 trillion. And then in the UK alone, it's 25 billion in terms of trade growth, and 224 billion in terms of efficiency savings. It's huge. It dwarfs, this initiative dwarfs every other trade initiative on the table in the world today. It's that big. Primary beneficiaries, by the way, are SMEs and small island economies, where the cost of trade can sometimes exceed the value of trade, and SMEs who feel the pinch, the pain of paper the most. So we're not talking about benefiting big companies here or big economies, we're talking about everybody. So I'm just going to share here a little bit of a timeline, just to give you a sense of the acceleration here. We've been talking about digitalization of trade for decades, but as you can see in the black down the left-hand side there, lots of good initiatives. We'll have Luca talking about the UNCITRAL model law and electronic transferable records at 1 o'clock today. Fantastic piece of work and a game changer. But in the last 3 years, we've achieved more than the last 18. And that's a sign that the private sector is really locking in on this issue now with governments and realizing that all of this system that we operate in needs to change, and it needs to change fast. So what's the call to action to all of you? It's very simple. Firstly, we need to remove the legal barriers to the handling of commercial trade documents. Those are written in law, and we need your help on behalf of governments to remove those barriers. Secondly, we need to align our legal systems to the UNCITRAL model law and electronic transferable records. That's the global framework for the handling of commercial trade documents in digital form. That gives us alignment. That means the information can flow, and that means the whole system can go digital. And then in the case of the Commonwealth, we've got a fantastic opportunity in April at the cluster meetings, and then in June, meeting ministers to put this into the roadmap into a fully integrated digital economy approach so that the trade systems across the Commonwealth can all go digital. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about this in the Commonwealth is I believe this network can accelerate digitalization of trade faster than any other network in the world, for the simple reason that a lot of us share the same base trade law. It often doesn't vary. It's word for word, copy and paste in a lot of countries. So we can accelerate that change far faster than others who have to go country by country in quite a lot of complexity. So what is the interoperable legal framework? Well, Luca's going to talk about this at 1 o'clock. The only reason I'm putting this up is just to give you a very clear sight of what documents we're talking about. There are 8 documents that are in paper form at the moment. These are not customs documents, they're not trade facilitation documents. These are the real heart of trade. It's the documents that refer to the ownership of the goods. Those are the ones that are on paper, and those are the ones that we need to go digital. And then down the right-hand side, to go back to that target, which sounds outrageous, but we're actually on track to cover the world in an interoperable legal framework where those commercial documents can be handled in digital form. There are already 7 countries aligned. The G7 is moving fast and all committed and in the process of removing legal barriers. The UK will be first in May and June, but there's a whole swathe of other countries. There's 86 countries at the WTO in e-commerce negotiations. Another question for all of you, are you involved in those negotiations? If you are, then there's a commitment to the Melita framework in that text. Please support it, it's really important. And then you've got groups of countries now integrating, including the UN, integrating the Melita commitment into existing frameworks. Is there technical support available? Yes. Multilateral development banks, most of them are all in the Legal Reform Advisory Board. We already have 3 projects up and running. Our goal is to have 10 up and running by the end of the year. But those banks are really key partners for you if you're looking for technical assistance in order to identify exactly what the legal problem is in your legal frameworks and support you to remove those legal barriers. And then we have a Centre for Digital Trade Innovation legal task force in the UK, which we set up specifically for the Commonwealth. We're just completing our first project in Thailand, which is not the Commonwealth, obviously, but it's there to help you. We understand the issue, and then obviously in the local area, the Inter-American Development Bank. And then there's a whole pile of policy tools. There's an ICC guide to legal reform for anyone who's interested in that. There's a whole bunch of interesting parliamentary hearings from the UK Electronic Trade Documents Bill. I'd highly recommend watching those. You get a real sense of where the politicians are at in their thinking on this. Very, very interesting. And then a question to everybody here, is the UK Electronic Trade Documents Bill a template? Question. I don't know, but I know it's an opportunity. It's taken 4 years to develop it. We believe that now countries can do that in 12 to 18 months. They don't need to go through the pain that we went through to identify the problem. For anyone who's using English law as a base law, then we believe there is an opportunity here to at least look at this piece of legislation, tweak it, adapt it, use it, copy it, whatever. The base law doesn't change, by the way. The Bills of Exchange Act in 1882 is a brilliant piece of law. It doesn't change. The Carriage of Goods by Sea Act is a great piece of law. That doesn't change. The only thing this piece of law does really is put commercial trade documents in digital form on the same legal footing as paper documents. We're not saying get rid of paper. We're saying digital is the same as paper. It's a very smart piece of law, and it's surprisingly short. It's a page and a half, no more. It's brilliant, brilliant piece of law. So if you want any help on that, you want any sort of support on that, please do get in contact. We've got the English or the Law Commission for England and Wales are fully supportive of this initiative. And then we've also got a surprisingly large group of Commonwealth countries already involved in this activity. We've got a group already aligned to the Melita framework. We've got another group already committed to it. And our hope is that we can scale that at the ministerial meeting in June so that everybody can benefit and the Commonwealth can take a lead. So just a quick zip through, because there are 3 key frameworks here. The legal framework is the one for governments to watch. The rule book for business is the ICC uniform rules on digital trade transactions. Not necessarily important for you if you're not from the private sector, but these are the guide rails for business. It's a new rule book from the ICC. It's very forward thinking, and it's fully integrated with the Melita framework. And then the big one is the standards toolkit. The ISO are a big part of this, by the way, along with the other major international standards bodies. This sets out exactly what standards you need to adopt. So for any company who's trying to standardize processes, their first problem is, which standard do I adopt? Far too many standards bodies are going out there saying, we're the standard. That's no help whatsoever in a cross-border environment where we just need to know it's this standard or that standard. Then we can link and connect our systems processes across the trading system. This toolkit does that. It's the equivalent of Apple and Microsoft sitting down, getting sensible, and then connecting their systems. And anyone who's old enough to remember what the world looked like before that, that's how we're living in the trade system. This toolkit is that same moment for trade. It's obviously more complex than 2 companies, but this is super important. And there's a lot more resources to come. Just a cautionary note to finish on. Don't go for a patchwork approach. There are some good examples of that happening or happened, and they didn't lead to any transformation whatsoever. Germany is one where they digitalized transport documents only, didn't lead to any change in the system because they missed off the other commercial trade documents. Korea is another good example, great promissory note market there, but didn't lead to change. Japan is another one along those lines. And then the big one on trade and customs and trade facilitation is, and this is not just the EU, but the EU is the best example of it, where you've got the most sophisticated customs market, but even with all of that investment, only 1% of commercial trade documents are handled in digital form. It's crazy. And that's because they missed the commercial documents, which is the most important piece of the trade system. And then we're also seeing technologies come into the market, good technologies, good solutions, good ideas, but they're failing because they're all hitting legal barriers when they cross over the borders. And that's why they're going under. We'll see more of those technology solutions go under, but it's a concern to us where we're seeing good investment going in, but we're not seeing enough emphasis from governments to say, get rid of the barriers and enable the market. It's really, really important. And then just a final word on implementation. Do have a thought that once those legal barriers or that legal reform is in process, you need to start to think about how do you implement a fully digitalized, standardized system. And to do that, you really need the help of industry to help pinpoint governments as to what the problem is and how to work through those problems and remove the barriers. And there's some really good examples now of industry-led initiatives. We've got the Centre for Digital Trade Innovation in the UK, but the Paris Europlace is on fire at the moment. They're doing some brilliant work in France. And then closer on this patch is ICC Mexico, which is actually the more common approach, where they've got industry in a working group, working with industry at large, but also with government. ICC Mexico, by the way, are the coordinating body for the whole Americas if you're interested in engaging in the ICC family. And then on the government side, talking about the digital divide, my concern is not about developed and developing markets in the context of trade digitalization. I'm concerned that all of us in the West are totally behind the East. They're a long, long way ahead in places like the ASEAN. All of us need to catch up, whether you're in Europe, US, Caribbean, doesn't matter where you are, we're all playing catch up at the moment. So there's a big job to do, but a massive opportunity as well, particularly in the Commonwealth, that 1.2 trillion. But these government agencies are well worth looking at. I think that's the future. When we're dealing with these two agencies, their technical capability is first class, and they're really able to understand exactly what's going on in that private sector system and develop the policies and support their government strategies in order to digitalize the whole digital economy, but specifically trade in this context. So thank you very much. Bit of a skip through, but I hope that's given you a quick run through. Most important call here is really please help us remove those legal barriers. It's such a small area of law, so technical, but it's so important to commercial business. And I think if you look at the past, the reason it hasn't happened, and I speak as a former government official, by the way, is it's slightly out of sight of a typical government kind of remit. You're looking at customs, you're looking at trade from a government perspective, not realizing that in this commercial track, which is the lion's share of trade, there's real problems that need government help. And I think that's the reason why we've missed it out in the past, both at the WTO and at national government level. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent presentation. Just 2 points to note. The whole providing legal recognition of paper documents in electronic form, in lawyer speak, we call it electronic equivalence in terms of drafting. And, you know, it's an interesting takeaway with regard to the agencies. Perhaps you have given us a lot of information. Perhaps one of the things we can tell you is that there's possibly room for an ICC Caribbean. And on that note, I can open the floor to any questions that you may have. Ashi?
We need a microphone here.
Adopting as a standard for Caribbean or for, you know, the wider region, the Americas perhaps?
It's an interesting point that we're going to publish. There's a number of things being published by the Digital Standards Initiative over the coming months, and one of those is an index. So we're very conscious that it's very hard to know what countries where, what model laws lead to what. You know, what's the journey that you go on in order to digitalize trade? And these kind of frameworks, there are a series of model laws. There's the e-commerce readiness assessments that were mentioned earlier on by UNCTAD. They're all brilliant initiatives, and they're all stepping stones to that final goal of full digitalization. That's the way we're looking at it. The simple message is we need to get on the journey and we need to start the process. What I'm highlighting here is the most important of all, and it's the piece that's been missing. It's all of those electronic transferable records is the legal term. You'll hear Luca talking about that at 1 o'clock. I call them commercial trade documents because that's basically what they are in business terms. But I think I wouldn't discount any other frameworks. They're all important. But the Melita framework is a holistic approach. It removes all of those barriers in one fell swoop, and it means that innovation can come into the market. And to the point on innovation earlier on, by the way, some really interesting side benefits to this. I'll give you an example of what's going on in the UK. We used to have a promissory note market. Promissory notes are basically an IOU. That's all they are. It's really, really simple. Very quick, very cheap, very easy to kind of manage. That market evaporated in the 1980s for whatever reason. Now with this new piece of legislation, it's coming back. And we realize that local authorities are moving a lot of government money to and fro across different local authorities and local jurisdictions. And at the moment, they're using bonds and loans, really complicated, far too expensive, and it doesn't really achieve anything except getting money from A to B. If you use promissory notes, not only can you get money from A to B much faster, you can put those on the market and raise money and to drive local investment, drive local growth, just by simply using a different tool. It's a new financial instrument. I think we'll see a lot more of that. So it's not just about digitalization of the trade system, it's about opening up opportunities for innovation, new technologies, more fintechs, more intermediaries to come into the market. We're certainly seeing a lot of those in the UK, whether it's trade, I call them trade techs, fintechs, insurtechs, regtech, law tech, loads of them, different sort of sub-communities. But they're really coming into the market at speed now because they're starting to see these signals that there are spaces in order to get out to those new communities that we haven't really been able to touch before.
I do have a question from Sandra Seeley. Lots of benefits to digitalization, but what happens to the unconnected? Will moving to 100% digital decrease the customer base?
It's a good question, that. I mean, I think, the fundamentals, actually, that's why I made a couple of comments last night when we were talking over drinks, that I was actually really impressed by the statistics in the earlier presentation yesterday, that I think the adoption rates and the internet connectivity is actually really strong here. It's a lot better than other parts of the world. I mean, I appreciate there is diversity in places like Suriname. I get that, big rural geographies. But on the whole, it's pretty good. And so that means that the baseline here, the foundations, if you like, are there. In other parts of the world, we really do need to work on that digital connectivity, because if you don't have the internet, obviously this isn't going to help you very much. And if you're really talking about financial inclusion, that's really, really fundamental. But from a business perspective, cost is also, data cost has got to come down. It's outrageously expensive in some parts of the world. So I don't see these as mutually exclusive. I think we've got to get, obviously, internet connectivity and data costs down. But I think we've got to also start to think a little bit further ahead than that and start to get in place the frameworks that are going to enable business to drive growth. It's not wait for one and then do the other one in 10 years' time. We can't do that. The more you wait, the more we all get left behind. We've got to sort of, be a bit more sophisticated and do these things at the same time.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, hi, good day. Renard Penn, BVI Attorney General's Chambers. I had a question for you. During your slide deck, you highlighted some of the potential savings from digitization. And one of the things that wasn't clear from that was where that savings is. Is that in the commercial market or on the government side in terms of implementing all of this digitization and how much the change in infrastructure on the government side is going to cost? Where was that savings being articulated from?
Yeah, it's a good question, that. I get asked this question a lot, why are those numbers so big? And my simple answer is, it doesn't matter what you believe in the numbers. You could cut them in half, you can cut them in 75%, they're still big numbers. And any government who's got tight public finances right now, those look attractive in terms of driving growth, right? So that's the way I look, broadly speaking, in the numbers. The numbers are from the private sector, but we are very conscious that in the government sector, there's a world of complexity and cost there too, right? Whether it's public procurement systems, in the UK as an example, you got 35 government agencies and departments interacting with borders. None of them have interoperable systems. So it's just copy, paste, repeat, duplicate. It's just insane amount of complexity there, wrapping up, government resources and taxpayers' money at the end of the day for no reason whatsoever. So I think actually the benefits for government, we underplay because we're very focused on the business sector, but actually I think the benefits for efficiency savings in government is huge too. So we shouldn't underestimate that. But primarily those numbers are simply because of all this paper going to and fro, check. It's absolutely madness when we could just be doing that at the click of a button through better use of technology. That's why the numbers, and don't forget too, right, the system is designed really for the 1800s because that's the law we're operating on. So the numbers are huge because you're leaping from the 1800s system straight into the 21st century. Now that sounds crazy, but that's basically what's happening here. We're just allowing modern technology to come in and be utilized at scale.
Thank you, Chris. believe that there's another question. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kay Seeley. I'm the Director of Foreign Trade here in Barbados. You mentioned the whole issue of costs, but I was wondering what kind of support would have been offered to the micro businesses in the transition to implementing digital documents, because it can be a little costly for them.
Yeah, that's a good question too. Look, I think we're having this conversation in the UK. I mean, our message, so there's different audiences here, right? And, you know, I look at this as if you imagine we're an icebreaker. We're right up front carving the way for a much cheaper, faster, simpler system for SMEs. We know they're the beneficiaries at the end, but right now we've got to carve a path for them. The message to SMEs, so that's the message to governments, is help us remove the legal barriers. We'll get on with the standards piece. Let's get the systems into place so that SMEs can benefit. When you turn that around to an SME audience, our message is really simple. Just get started. Well, first of all, digitalization is happening. Back to that timeline, that we're not talking about this stuff anymore. It's actually happening. And so if you want to keep up with the pace, then now's the moment to get started. So our message is simply get started, start to get familiarized with the technology solutions that are in the market. There's no issue with technology here, by the way. That's a red herring in a big way. But just get started on that road. We know that there are lots of SMEs out there who are not digital at all. They're still operating completely in paper. Some of them are sort of hybrid. Some of them are really sophisticated. So depending on where their starting point is just keep moving in that direction and accelerate that investment as much as you possibly can. And for those who are really ready, we're not far off now, going fully digital, and then you can actually really reap the rewards. And the big challenge, of course, here is to change behavior. We know full well that, you know, we've been in a trading system for decades and centuries. It's not going to be the click of a finger and suddenly everyone's going to go digital. It's going to take time for all of us to work together. And that goes back to the models I mentioned earlier, why public-private partnerships are so important here. You know, if it's industry-led, government-supported, that's our tagline really, then we can all go to industry, especially SMEs, and give that really affirmative message that we are all investing in this system to make it better for them. And that gives them the confidence to invest in new technology solutions. So that's the sort of message to SMEs. And then eventually, of course, they'll be able to just utilize the system and won't even be thinking about it. I hope that's answered the question.